The basic mechanic is that the United States Treasury would issue a new series of bonds called BitBonds. And when you start to input the historical compound annual growth rates for Bitcoin into a structure like this, what you begin to see is that the potential for appreciation for the government to acquire a significant amount of Bitcoin organically and at no incremental cost is very, very high. And then when you say how much could it appreciate, it could really serve to offset uh, a very significant amount, if not all, of the funded federal debt.
Excellent. So I'm Renee Sorchik. I'm the VP of Research at BPI, and I'm speaking today with Andrew Hohns, who's the founder and Chief Executive Officer of New Market and Battery Finance, and Matthew Pines, the Executive Director of BPI. And we have a very exciting topic today. We'll be discussing BitBonds, which Andrew presented at the Bitcoin for America event. And we're very excited to dig deeper and talk a little bit more. But before we do, maybe you want to introduce yourself, Andrew, and give a little bit of background?
Sure. I'm just so pleased to be here, Renee and Matt. It's great to be here with you and to have recently co-authored the Bitcoin Enhanced Treasury Bonds white paper, an idea whose time has come. My background has been in structured finance for 25 years, structured credit. I've done a lot of securitization, cash securitization, synthetic securitization. And for the last 5 years, I've been very actively building with Bitcoin in structured credit. And the BitBonds proposal is really an outgrowth of that, but from a public policy point of view.
And Matt, maybe, and a lot of people know who you are, but do you want to also give a little bit about you? You have such a wide breadth and depth of knowledge about economics and some of these macro trends. Do you want to give a little bit of background on yourself as well?
Yeah, I won't do the full background. You can see the bio, and I think most folks listening to this will know my background. But I think my perspective that's relevant to this topic and BitBonds in particular is my sense of the scale and pace of change the overall global economic system and monetary system is undergoing at the moment. And the reason why we had the subtitle for the white paper is like an idea whose time has come is both the sense that Bitcoin has reached a level of maturity and institutional adoption that it is ready for sovereigns to take a serious look at it and to see how it can be incorporated as a policy instrument alongside their traditional tools of managing the debt and managing their fiscal balance sheet, but also in the context of the larger shifts and disorder we're seeing in the global economic and geopolitical system, where the rise of outside monies, the rise of harder assets, the sort of sense of insecurity associated with the legacy systems and reserve assets is now bringing to the fore questions that maybe were more hypothetical, right? And so I think several years ago, this prospect of the government issuing Bitcoin-backed debt instruments of some combination was, somewhat of a fantasy, right? A kind of a dorm room idea, right? And I think it's no longer a fantasy, no longer outside the Overton window, and that's why we wanted to put this on the board. So my background is thinking about the geopolitical and monetary systems, how they intersect with Bitcoin as an emerging asset and global network that's now at the sovereign level, right? We have the executive order that established the strategic Bitcoin reserve. And so this is what's next, right? If the government is going to be serious about a pro-Bitcoin policy shift that's more than rhetoric, what does that look like? How can we fully capitalize on the US's present advantage in Bitcoin? It's open systems, it's democracy, it's creativity. And I think Andrew had this idea, and he had, in the true BPI fashion, not just had the idea, but like cashed it out in detail, like ran the numbers. And it just was an ideal topic to dig our teeth into and put out this white paper. So we're really pleased to have him present this idea at Bitcoin for America. I think it was one of the most attention-grabbing presentations at that event, which was very successful. And the white paper is just fleshing that out, putting additional meat on the bone. And now it's about bringing it to the attention of policymakers and seeing if it can be a significant contribution to our nation's fiscal health over the long term, which is what really this is all about. So wasn't really a bio about myself, but that's I think why that this is very interesting, why I'm compelled to talk about it, and why I'm really happy to have Andrew kind of partner and collaborate and kind of lend his expertise to pushing this forward.
Andrew, I'm so curious. Like, what got you thinking about BitBonds? What got you, to kind of come up with the idea and to get it, flesh it out, and where you got it? Like, can you give us a little bit of background?
Well, I would say that, in a sense, if there was a starting point, it was probably around the year 2000, because I was graduating from Wharton, and David Walker, who was the United States Comptroller General, was coming, and he gave a talk on campus at Houston Hall. And I remember because he vividly warned that the debt had exceeded something like $5 trillion and that it was growing at an unsustainable pace. And in his view, unless urgent steps were taken to address the trajectory, Social Security was going to face a major crisis roughly around the year 2030 or 2035. And it would be our generation that would bear the brunt of those challenges. And so he left all of us with a challenge. He said, it's up to you. Our generation has not been able to get this on the right course. It's up to you to figure this out. And, I've never forgotten that talk. I mean, I'm bringing it up right now. And he was serving as the head of the Pete Peterson Institute, which is focusing a lot of energy on, public awareness of the fiscal and monetary position of the United States. And I've always had it in my mind. But I've also watched, like we all have, the price of soda go from 35 cents a can in one of those big stand-up machines to now, if you can, get a can per retail sale, it's what, $2, $3, more likely a bottle, $3 or more sometimes. Not to mention how much it costs at the stadium. And I was looking yesterday at the compound annual growth rate of the funded federal debt since 1981, which is when it first crested $1 trillion. And through the present day, it's 8.6% per year, compound annual growth rate over 44 years. That's a big number.
Wild, yeah.
So, I've just been, thinking and really trying to challenge myself. How can we address this? And it's not realistic to pay off the debt. I'm not even really sure what that means in the context of the fiscal structure of the United States and the deficit position. But Bitcoin, it actually provides this extremely interesting path to grow the asset side of the balance sheet much faster than the liability side of the balance sheet. And not so much to pay off the debt as to put the country in a vastly more sustainable, in fact, a strong financial position. And so, with that in mind, I just, began to kind of put some paint on the canvas around using structured finance techniques of tranching and different priority of payment in order to think about, is there a way that we could create a really beneficial outcome here while at the same time creatively solving this problem.
Did you run a bunch of models to kind of, optimize or?
Well, look, I'll give my second shout out to Elon Musk, because my partner in developing the proposal was Grok. So I had the idea of tranching up the debt in this way. And I worked with Grok for about an hour and a half and went back and forth with some queries and said, what if we structure it this way? What if we structure it that way? So, coincidentally, the leader of the Department of Government Efficiency may very well be deserving significant credit for offsetting the debt of the United States. But yeah, I mean, it was coming from President Trump's executive order, and I think that he gave, first of all, it's exceptional leadership to have issued this executive order, and we're seeing exceptional leadership in Congress as well. with Senator Cynthia Lummis having reintroduced the Bitcoin Act of 2025 and companion legislation in the House from Congressman Begich, which is gaining momentum. I was pleased to note the other day that another representative, Representative Onder from Missouri's 3rd District, and the representative at large from the Northern Mariana Islands joined on board as co-sponsors. But both pieces of legislation would definitely benefit from additional co-sponsors. But, President Trump in that executive order, when he said, look, the government has to develop revenue neutral ways to acquire the Bitcoin. For me, that was an inspiration. That was a jumping off point for thinking about, with something that appreciates so rapidly and is poised to appreciate so rapidly based on its usefulness, its versatility, its rate of adoption, how could we create a product where we could share in the upside as between Americans and the American government so that everyone really can benefit from putting the country on a stable fiscal trajectory?
If you had to explain the idea of the BitBond to a 26-year-old staffer for someone on the banking committee or the House Ways and Means Committee, how would you kind of pitch it in, a simple way?
I would say that Bitcoin is the most popular savings tool on earth for those that have made the journey and realized it. And it's not because it has a good marketing department. It doesn't have any marketing department. It's because its attributes are phenomenal. It is finite, divisible, fungible, universal, weightless, all of the things that we know Bitcoin is. But for a lot of people who either have not fully engaged in that process of understanding Bitcoin, or who don't have the appetite for that full volatility, or who don't have funds that are designed to take on that full volatility, there's a massive amount of funds that are designed to just do short-term credit risk. And no matter how enthusiastic the managers of those vehicles might be about Bitcoin, that's not what their mandate is. Mm-hmm. And so to think about Bitcoin less as an end within itself and more as a tool that could be used to reshape other avenues of the financial world, that's the whole motivation behind our work at Battery Finance, is blending Bitcoin and credit. And what we're doing with the BitBonds proposal is applying that to federal debt, which is one of the most liquid credit markets in the world, United States treasuries, and appealing to a couple of specific audiences. On the one hand, retail audiences, families, offering them a really fantastic tool for savings and inflation protection, where they can set aside money for a period of time, like 10 years, be 100% confident that they won't lose the money because it is guaranteed to be repaid by the United States government, where they'll be happy to accept a modest current return, 1%, which will save the government money and make the government more fiscally stable, which is to the benefit of everyone in America. But at the same time, where they can express a medium-term view on the performance of Bitcoin as a tool for savings, but without the tax consequence. And that's a very, very attractive proposition for a family that maybe is setting aside even $500 a year 10 years down the road to think about how are they going to afford future education or future healthcare bills or invest in their business in the future or any purpose for savings. And on the other hand, for an institutional investor, where treasuries play an extremely important role in terms of collateralizing all different types of financial arrangements, it's way more attractive, in my opinion, to post as collateral a bond that has a lower current interest rate, but a vastly higher potential for total return as eligible collateral than it would be to post a bond that has a slightly higher interest rate, but no potential for outperformance, especially in an inflationary world. So I think that, at least those two audiences and potentially many others will be extremely attracted to the attributes of the BitBond And then it's a win-win-win because the federal government can lower its current interest expense, which is extremely important to several members of Congress. I know that that's one of the, Senator Lummis is extremely knowledgeable about Bitcoin and passionate about Bitcoin in its own right, because it's censorship resistant and freedom money and great money for energy conservation. But equally, she's passionate about fiscal responsibility and has been for 30 years. And, so appealing to individuals like that in terms of lowering the interest cost of the current expense, the interest expense, and then at the same time, vesting within the public balance sheet an asset that is poised to appreciate so dramatically over the course of the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, to the point where as we build different vintages of BitBonds, we're building an extremely strong foundation for America's continued leadership in international finance. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world to me. So, yeah, I mean, if I were in the room with that congressional staffer, I would say, let's just give it a try. It doesn't have to be, I mean, one of the great contributions that you made to the paper, Matt, was the implementation schedule, I said, well, what if we did a $2 trillion program? Because I was trying to solve for the amount of Bitcoin that would generate a significant offset defeasance of the federal debt in 20 years under rational CAGRs. But I don't think you start with a $2 trillion offering. You start with a smaller bite size and, figure out where you can find the natural buyers.
So what's like the basic mechanic of a BitBond? Could you kind of explain to someone who doesn't understand structured credit?
The basic mechanic is that the United States Treasury would issue a new series of bonds called BitBonds. And let's say that you buy a $100 bond. It would be offered at a certain interest rate. We propose 1%. And the use of proceeds, that $100, $90 would go to fund the usual government needs, whatever they may be, and $10 would buy Bitcoin. Every year, the government would owe 1%, $1 of interest per $100 of bonds to the holders of those bonds. And at the end of the life of the bond, 10 years, the bondholder would be entitled to 100% of the Bitcoin gains up to the equivalent of a 4.5% compound annual return on the bond. That would mean that they would be entitled in total to about $155, repayment of principal plus that 4.5% compounded over the life of the bond. And anything above that total return is shared 50-50 between the United States government and the bondholder. And when you start to input the historical compound annual growth rates for Bitcoin into a structure like this, what you begin to see is that the potential for appreciation for the government to acquire a significant amount of Bitcoin organically and at no incremental cost is very, very high. And then when you say how much could it appreciate, it could really serve to offset a very significant amount, if not all, of the funded federal debt in answer to David Walker's, original challenge. On the downside, if for whatever reason, which I personally don't view as even remotely likely, but if for whatever reason Bitcoin fails to appreciate or even goes down in value, it's still a net present value positive for the government because the reduction in the current interest rate more than offsets the Bitcoin component of the of the initial use of proceeds. So in that case, yeah, it's a win-win-win all around.
And this might be a question for you, Matt, but feel free to chime in, Andrew. But like, what would the actual process look like for getting this into production? Like, what is the legislative process? What does the Treasury have to do to issue essentially a new type of bond? Because I'm imagining there's some legal barriers or some, administrative barriers to overcome. And what does that look like? And then also what kind of timeline, how long would this take before it actually could get to market?
Yeah, so this is a novel concept, and so there are existing statutes that you could interpret, that the Treasury Department could interpret as giving it the authority to issue such bonds. The Second Liberty Bond Act, 31 USC 3102, gives the Treasury the authority to issue bonds in various formats. There's nothing in those laws that say Bitcoin, and so there's a matter of interpretation, how much they would want to stretch their authority to issue something under existing authorities. You know, ultimately, different presidents interpret their ambit wider than others. But if you want this to survive over the long term, you would want to get explicit legal authorization coming from Congress, right? So maybe you could do something on the margin. Maybe you could use emergency authorities to issue a BIT bond or something like it. But I think the more sustainable, credible path is to go through Congress, right? To get a legislative authorization to the department to issue essentially a new class of Treasury securities that have this particular structure. And that it would likely involve, again, some sort of phased implementation, a pilot program, studies, and gradual development of the market over time to the point where I think, as Andrew lays out in his models, it could become a substantial element of U.S. Debt issuance. There is different legislative paths, right, to such a process, right? You could go through the regular legislative process. You need 60 votes in both houses or in the Senate, and then majority in Congress. You need to kind of get the House Ways and Means, the relevant finance and budget committees on board, and the president. It's feasible that maybe you could get it through something like a reconciliation process. That would require interpretation by the parliamentarians, scoring by the CBO, of course. But the benefit of a reconciliation process, it only requires 51 votes. I think we're probably at the stage right now of kind of policymaker education and awareness, right? I think this is a new concept, and I think it's a powerful concept, but a lot of folks inside the White House, in the Treasury Department, and on Capitol Hill just don't even know it exists as an idea. So I think like the first step is just communication, education, awareness building, that this is actually a pretty powerful and relatively simple concept. It can be executed. There are little to no downside risks, and there are pretty large and substantial upside risks. And it kind of matches in a bipartisan fashion everyone's objectives, which is we want the government to be more fiscally sustainable over the long term. That gives any administration more capacity to pursue their political objectives, right? So it's inherently nonpartisan. It's to the advantage of the United States strategically in an environment where we're increasingly finding it difficult to source large demand for our increasingly accelerating debts. And so I think this is at the center of a lot of overlapping concentric circles. And so the first step is just building awareness, understanding, aligning all these different stakeholders to where they have a common interest. And then ultimately, like the legislative paths tend to sort of follow from that, right? Like once everyone understands and it fits with their existing incentives and their long-term interests, then you can think about the package. Then you can think about the relevant committee processes. We are, I think, the step before that, right? We are at the step of getting all those relevant stakeholders aligned and understanding the power of this idea.
So what I'm hearing from you, this definitely has to be a bipartisan legislative process, right? If you need 51%, because otherwise the risk is if you go another way, and then in 4 years from now, a new administration comes in, you could overturn this, and that would be trouble for the bondholders, right? You don't want that kind of scenario.
Well, so any debts that government issues are, can't be defaulted on, right? So there's the 14th
that's what I was wondering. Like, what would happen?
Yeah, so there's a constitutional amendment that basically says the government will not repudiate its debts. It's the 14th Amendment. And then we have a statutory obligation under the Public Debt Act that the Treasury Department, doesn't default on the bonds it issues. So they can't be unissued by a future administration. So if someone was really hostile to Bitcoin, they couldn't,
alter it so it's no longer Bitcoin. They can,
once they issue a debt, and I'm sure Andrew can, once they issue this debt instrument into the public markets, it's a liability of the federal government, right? And they now have the same obligations to that contract as with any other debt. And if they decided to alter those conditions, it would be considered a form of default, which would be very
Very bad.
damaging for the U.S. government. But what the future administration could do is they could stop future issuances. They could, and as you saw with the Treasury Department right now, the Secretary of the Treasury has a lot of discretion about how they choose to issue debt, right? Like where along the curve, like every quarter, there's a quarterly refunding announcement where they, essentially articulate to the market where they believe the government's going to be borrowing money, essentially issuing debt securities at different sort of durations along the curve. And they do that very strategically to try to make sure that they're not issuing too much at a part of the curve where there might be not enough demand and interest rates could rise. And so one of the problems that we've seen in the past few years is, especially the last 2 years, increasing an abnormal issuance at the short end, so short duration debt securities, where there is a lot of demand because people have a lot of need for kind of short duration collateral. But essentially what it means is a lot of refinancing risk now built into the debt curve for the United States government. And that's the challenge we're going to be facing right now, where we have to refinance into high interest rates. That debt burden is quite significant. I think roughly one basis points of extra interest costs is roughly $1 billion. And so anything that brings interest costs down, especially at the long end of the curve, or at least the belly, is generates a lot of fiscal benefit to the U.S. government. So this is why this idea, and I'll turn it back to Andrew for a question on the maybe more of the mechanics of how you think these would, because I'm very interested in how you think these would trade, right? Because there's a primary market, right, for debt securities where the government issues them. Primary dealers, foreign official institutions. There's lots of, even retail buyers can purchase directly from the government. And then there's a massive market, in the secondary market for off-the-run Treasury securities, where these instruments are traded, and they are quite, foundational to the financial system. So I'm curious how you think about how these securities would trade, right? Like what the market might be that would evolve around these instruments, and how. I guess in one sense, like how could they be too successful in the sense that you think the demand for such bonds would be so significant that maybe there'd be less demand for a vanilla Treasury security? I don't want the pure fiat, boring Treasury security. I want the Bitcoin loaded up one.
Well, then why not just issue more of the BitBond? I mean, the interest rate is lower, the upside is greater, it's way more fiscally sustainable. I mean, I don't see a scenario where it's like, oh, we have too much of that, too much demand for that. That's a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I do believe that will not also, I don't also think that is going to really materialize in the near term. I think that there will be continued demand for for traditional, let's say, Treasury securities. And different people have different objectives. Some people want to buy a 0 coupon bond. Some people want to buy a 1-year bond, a 2-year bond, 10-year bond, long bond. Some people might be very interested in the upside, element. I think that the tax exemption would put this in a special position relative to the other tools that are available to savers for federal debt. And I mean, it would be really nice if you could go to the supermarket and there was a fellow out in front of the supermarket handing out a pamphlet saying, here's all the information that you need to know about how you could put $250 to work for your family in a very, very attractive and tax exempt way. And at the same time, really benefit America, because there are a great number of people in our country, from individuals to families to business owners, small businesses, large businesses. There are a great number of people that are deeply patriotic and deeply committed to the success of the American project. And there aren't that many direct ways to support it. And I think that one of the intangible benefits of a project like this is it's extremely unifying. It really it aligns everyone's interests in a really profound way. And I think I think that's good for America. I think that the more that we can align the interests of, American taxpayers, whether they be rural or urban, West Coast or East Coast or North or South or Midwest or Southeast or Louisiana, wherever folks are, the more that they can feel that they're sharing in a project, that will be beneficial in so many different ways. So, yeah, and like I lately the Republicans have really demonstrated leadership around Bitcoin. President Trump's leadership is terrific. Secretary Lutnick and Secretary Bessent and Secretary Kennedy as well had a bold proposal at the Bitcoin conference in 2024 in regards to Bitcoin. And Senator Lummis and Congressman Begich. And in fact, all of the co-sponsors in both houses for the time being are Republican co-sponsors. But if I'm thinking about this from the point of view of a bipartisan project or even a nonpartisan project, because it's not a partisan question, should we address the looming national debt crisis? And the funded federal debt is only part of the story, because the rest of the story also entails considering Social Security and the unfunded liability associated with that, and Medicare, and not to mention all of those, but the states have extremely significant looming burdens in the form of public pensions that are largely funded at a ratio of about 75% assets to liabilities. And it's naive to think that those will not result in a fiscal crisis that careens around different states and up to the federal level as well. So addressing this complex set of challenges requires it requires American focus, not Republican focus, not Democrat focus. It requires American focus. And for people that are American and are committed to advancing the project of America, I think that this proposal is really sensible for all the reasons we mentioned. It lowers interest rates. It puts an asset on the balance sheet that can appreciate faster than the liabilities. It delivers a good savings tool for everyday American families. But when you start to look at Bitcoin, and this is where I think it could be really interesting in reaching out to the Democrat side of both the House and the Senate, I think that we should be really active in spreading the word about Bitcoin's work from an energy conservation point of view. What Bitcoin mining is doing to reduce orphan oil well and natural gas well emissions and potentially solve landfill emissions and transform them from just venting into the atmosphere and transform them into Bitcoin. And what the federal government could do by creating a framework to encourage people to take emissions that are being generated on federal lands, or if not federal lands, privately held, but create strategies for example, bonus depreciation recapture or other incentives to encourage people to really address the emissions that are coming off of spent or retired oil wells, natural gas wells, landfills. Also, you look at, and that's an issue that's near and dear to a lot of folks on the Democrat caucus. You look at savings, and a lot of individuals that are really facing strong challenges from inflation. Bitcoin is a better savings tool. It's way more accessible. It is way more fair. It is available to the unbanked and the underbanked on the same exact terms as it is available to institutional investors, and it delivers all of the same benefits. And incorporating Bitcoin into a Bitcoin element into things like small business administration loans for renewing main streets across America, or housing finance for adding some Bitcoin to the American dream and giving homeowners a tool that can accrete over time and enable them to repair their homes and invest in their neighborhoods and their businesses. When you start to think about the multidimensionality of Bitcoin, I think that there are paths where we as a Bitcoin community can try to meet our elected officials around the issues that they've articulated as most important to them and their constituencies and try to find common ground. I mean, nothing would be better, in my opinion, on the Bitcoin Act of 2025, which is around the strategic Bitcoin reserve, than 100 co-sponsors in the United States Senate. Wouldn't that be the best thing that could come out of all of this? So, yeah.
No, it's an inspiring message in the sense that Bitcoin is inherently nonpartisan, right? Unfortunately, we've had different pendulum swings in U.S. politics, but I think inherent to the technology, inherent to its effect on our society, it's got a lot going for it across both sides of the aisle. Well, one thing I want to press you on is the level of urgency that you think this policy proposal demands, right? There's lots of ideas that get thrown out in DC. Think tanks produce white papers all the time. We have conferences. It's kind of the thing. And they just sort of churn these ideas out. And it's about steering the long-term policy conversation, shaping things for years down the line. But, when I look at our debt situation, when I look at the geopolitical situation, I think there's a matter of urgency that we need to be unconventional in our approach, to look at creative ways that we can reshore and restore our national balance sheet. And I think about the numbers here, right? So I think we have these in a white paper, roughly like $9 trillion of federal debt maturing in the next 12 months, $14 trillion in the next 3 years, just a massive refinancing wall coming up imminently. And market rates at the 10-year, 4.5%? Haven't checked today, roughly. Quite expensive. Those ongoing interest costs are a burden. We're spending more on our national debt service than on our national defense. Meanwhile, you have this idea, right, and the BitBonds that's trying to meet that scale and meet that pace of urgency. And I think the original target, right, we talked about a phased implementation, but the real let's take a crack at this is $2 trillion, right, which is maybe 20% of the 2025 kind of total refinancing requirement. So when you kind of ran your numbers, right, the model that you made, and you obviously have a bunch of assumptions, different parameters to tweak, but one sort of central scenario that you modeled out is over a 10-year period. If you make some of these assumptions, that BitBonds could generate annual interest savings of $70 billion a year compared to just conventional treasury issuance, and that like net present value of that savings is $550 billion. And so if you account for the initial purchase of the Bitcoin, say 200 billion, that's like a total savings in present value of $350 billion. That seems like a lot. And then over the long term, right, you make this argument that, during, depending on how you assume the appreciation of Bitcoin, you could, defease or essentially offset all or more of the national debt. That seems almost too good to be true, right? If I'm putting my hat on as a staffer or a senior policymaker, it seems like there's got to be a catch. Is there a catch? And like, what am I missing if I'm just skeptical that's possible?
I mean, I think it's a very elegant proposal, and I don't think that there's a catch. Mm-hmm. I also believe that the adoption of Bitcoin by the United States federal government, and it's not only the United States federal government. I mean, in various stages of progress across over 30 states around the country right now, you have strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation and other Bitcoin rights legislation pending in state houses, state senates. Some will pass this session, some will pass next session, more will pass as time goes on. Other countries around the world, many other countries around the world are very actively engaging with Bitcoin. I've been very impressed with the United Arab Emirates and their forward-oriented policy. And when you just think about, the world is becoming more digital overall. And, we will definitely have more modes of digital engagement, digital transfer of energy, maybe even matter, who knows, across time and space. New things are being developed every day that are really amazing. It's an incredible timeline to live in right now, in my opinion. And we need a tool that is capable of traveling at the speed of light in a natively digital format in order to facilitate all of these recombinations of ideas that are happening around the world and perhaps beyond the atmosphere of the world. That is something that's in discussion too. And so when you have large economic actors that begin to develop a vested interest in the Bitcoin and they hold it on their balance sheets for the long run, uh, it will have a it will have what's the right it'll have a catalytic effect in terms of energizing so much additional development and so much additional adoption that the likelihood of achieving the target compound annual growth rates, which, after all, what we've been looking at in terms of making a very big impact on the debt, is on the lower end of the historical performance of Bitcoin. The likelihood of achieving those, I think, is high. I think it's high, and if for some reason something that I personally don't foresee, something that you don't foresee, something that the 250 million people around the world that are already investing and saving in Bitcoin don't foresee. But if something materializes where Bitcoin were to become, for example, worthless, I mean, that's the worst that could happen, right? Is that it's no longer worth anything. But what is that world? That doesn't even really compute. But if it were to happen, then you would still have a present value savings on the interest of the debt that we're talking about issuing here. And, it might not do the double duty of also defeasing the debt, but it would be very, very valuable in and of itself to just do the single duty of reducing the current interest expense of the federal government and reducing the burden on taxpayers. The urgency of all of this, look, if I'm going to be perfectly candid with you, my view is that no matter what path is taken, we are in for a significant depreciation of the value of currency and a significant monetization of the debt of the United States. I do not view that it is in any way feasible to repay $37 trillion worth of today's value and not borrow additional money. It's not the current fiscal structure of the government and our future entitlements, not rationally, not pragmatically. And therefore, the plan is, to monetize the older indebtedness with, gradual inflation. I mean, that's what all systems are pointing toward. And if when you realize that that's the basic structure of the system, I think that for policymakers, there are two separate paths to choose from. One path is a substantial amount of future inflation that falls on the shoulders of the coming generations of Americans, but without the assets to offset it. And that is a dark and discouraging future to contemplate. And the other path is, yes, we have inflation because of some of the structural format of the government right now, but with the asset position of the balance sheet vastly improved and strengthened and poised to accrete over time, we will have increasing flexibility to plan for the future with energy and with creativity. And we'll have the resources to carry that out. And that's a way better outcome for us to deliver to the coming generations of Americans than the alternative. A way, way better outcome. It's not even, it's in a different galaxy. It's so different. So, the urgency right now is we need as a people, and you should call your representative if you're listening to this, and don't just write an email. Pick up the phone, call your representative, call your senator, go in person. If you happen to be walking by the office or if you're in Washington, visit and say, you're here to talk about the BitBonds. You really would like them to take this proposal seriously. It's amazing what a little bit of citizen engagement can achieve in the United States if it is directed toward the members of Congress. We've seen it time and time again. That has an incredible, incredible outcome. But what we really need for people to do right now, for taking that kind of initiative and telling the politicians, look, we can't kick the can anymore. There's no more kicking the can. There's an opportunity, however, to really restructure things in a way that is made possible by where we are in Bitcoin's evolution. And this is not going to be available, in my opinion, on the same basic terms as what is available right now in 6 years or 10 years or 14 years. Because at that period of time, Bitcoin's going to continue to do Bitcoin things, which in this context means that it's going to be adopted widely. It's going to prove itself in a huge range of versatile use cases. More and more people are going to desire it. More and more people are going to invest in it. More and more institutions, companies, businesses, families, everything else like that. And, to a certain extent, the possibility for significant gains may be truncated. It may not. We'll see in the future. It depends somewhat on the quantity of money. But for where we are right now, and for the vantage that we have over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, this is a golden opportunity for President Trump, through his leadership and his cabinet, Secretary Bessent, and the Congress, on an all-partisan basis, on an all-American basis, to say, let's give this a shot. Because to your point earlier, Matt, getting the interest expense down means that if in the future the priority is, supporting infrastructure, or if in the future the priority is supporting certain kinds of small businesses, or supporting certain kinds of health programs or defense programs or cultural programs, or whatever the types of programs are, getting the interest expense down today and getting an asset on our federal balance sheet that is poised to appreciate way faster than our liabilities is going to give future leaders way more degrees of freedom in elaborating strategic initiatives that are relevant to Americans at those future times.
All right, we're just going to cut that. We'll just send it to all 535 members of Congress. The one idea that I've been thinking about is, given the sense of this moment, right? We're kind of in this inflection point where Bitcoin is matured as an asset class. It's now kind of been de-risked from its kind of social institutional taboos, and now you have this sovereign kind of endorsement from the United States government. But you have bureaucracies. Bureaucracies are slow, right? So the captain in the bird's nest has sort of called the direction that he wants to move the ship of state in, and it takes a while for that order to be passed down through the bridge room, and then eventually the engine be redirected. Then the American ship of state is an exceptionally large ship of state. We're a democracy. That means we have to be deliberative. We have to discuss things. They go through committees, et cetera, et cetera. There are other countries that have different forms of government, much more authoritarian, much more, two guys get in a room to make a decision, and then it happens. And this idea of a BitBond is not, an idea that only America could pick up, right? So what do you assess as the possibility that, say, the Emirates, right, which already we know has established a position in Bitcoin. They've publicly announced their ownership of Bitcoin in their sovereign wealth fund, and it's very credible to me, given the fact that they've been mining for many years, that they likely have substantial Bitcoin holdings as well. For an entity like that, right, that sees the same argument, I want to have lower debt costs. I want to tap into capital markets in a way that I'm not able to now. What do you think the possibility is of, if America takes too long, or we don't pick up this idea, that others will? And what are the strategic risks of not taking the mantle of leadership at this particular moment?
I think that the I think that a wonderful laboratory of democracy is the one that we've set up in the United States, and that's the 50 states that we have around our country. And each of those states obviously has a state legislature, and they issue bonds, and those bonds are tax exempt bonds already. And I think that with all of this vibrancy that's happening around different state initiatives regarding Bitcoin, a very, very, very natural fit would be for a state or local government to issue a BitBond in order to support infrastructure or other forms of investment at that local level. I was reading recently in Philadelphia, and it's not a happy story what I'm about to share. But I was reading recently that Philadelphia is issuing $300 million worth of bonds in order to build a long-term. Maybe you could say it's happy for the people that it will benefit, but as a general commentary, to build a long-term rehabilitation facility for people that are badly addicted to drugs. And I'm thinking about it, and I'm saying, wow, this is how we're using $300 million, which is a significant amount of overall indebtedness for the city of Philadelphia. And, this can have a very important impact on the lives of the people that are served by this facility, provided that it's carried out well. And it's impossible to quantify that in dollar terms. But at the same time, I'm also familiar with the stretched resources that exist in the city of Philadelphia from a fiscal point of view, the overhang of pension indebtedness, the insufficiently funded infrastructure, even old wooden water pipes, or streets that haven't been properly maintained, or public transportation that's not properly maintained. And Philadelphia is in a relatively strong position. You go to some other cities and they're much smaller, or they don't have the same kind of business base. And there are many cities that we could refer to in this way. And if you were to imagine, okay, instead of doing like a 6.5% revenue bond, where the monies were used to finance a stadium, or a 6% general obligation bond, where the monies are used to finance a clinic like this for $300 million, what if we did a $330 million bit bond? And what if we were able to lower the interest rate for for the city of Philadelphia and its taxpayers, instead of 6%, 2%, or instead of 6.5%, whatever, 2.5%, and deliver some combination of Bitcoin upside on a tax exempt basis to the bondholders. That becomes way more sustainable for cities and states to repair their infrastructure and to make their strategic investments that they're contemplating. And again, it's a win-win-win. You lower the interest rate, you put some Bitcoin on the balance sheet of municipalities and states around the country, and you put into the hands of savers and investors a superior way to support something that they feel passionately about. As far as other countries doing it, other countries could do it, but that's why we're doing this podcast right now, is to try to get America to do it first. So let's go. It's really right there. The only things that you could say that are preventing it are that it hasn't been done before.
Mm-hmm.
But many things have not been done before that have become successful over time. The Teamsters. You know what the Teamsters logo is? I'm sure you've seen it. It's the horses on top of a spoked wheel. And that's because the Teamsters, of course, were originally team drivers of horse-drawn carriages. And that's how they transported all of the goods from one place to another. And in the early 1900s, there was a big debate about whether the Teamsters should embrace the mechanical horse, i.e. the car, the truck. And there were some people that felt that they should stick with the horse because it was in their logo and they had had a lot of success with the horse. But then there were others that were somewhat more forward-looking, and they said the mechanical horse seems to be like a good innovation. And, it's hard to imagine the future until you step into the future. But once you've stepped into it, it's hard to believe that you were in the past. And I think that this is a particular moment in time where so many new ideas are proliferating from so many different vantages, and where people understand the urgency, and they're willing to think creatively and boldly, in order to address the challenges.
So thinking about stepping into the future, this is a question maybe more for Matt. What are the next steps for BPI in terms of trying to move this forward? What will we be doing? Maybe who are we meeting with? We already talked about kind of we need to do a lot more around education, but like concretely, maybe you want to talk about some of the things that we are planning to do to push this idea forward.
Yes, so we have a very active government affairs function, as well as an active kind of advocacy, public communications, and thought leadership function at BPI. And I think we are kind of wielding all different functions at BPI to push those ideas that we think, one, have the highest strategic impact, right? And that align with our mission, and that we think are just good ideas. And I think this fits squarely within our wheelhouse. And so a lot of the conversations that we have on Capitol Hill, in many ways are catching people up to kind of the basics, right? We kind of have to understand that the folks operating and listening to this podcast are often at the frontier of thinking about Bitcoin, thinking about geopolitics, thinking about intersection of Bitcoin and the financial markets. The average staffer on Capitol Hill is a 25-year-old that has multiple portfolios. And some of them know about Bitcoin, but they still think Bitcoin is the same thing as Farcoin, right? You have this kind of, you have to operate always at two levels, kind of at the grad school level, at the frontier, where for those critical staffers on the relevant committees, House Ways and Meads, the financial committees, the budget committees, the key staffers inside executive agencies, specifically the Treasury Department, their Office of Debt Management, the Senior Advisor for Digital Assets at the Treasury Department, the Senior Advisor for Digital Assets at the White House, Hohns, the AI and Crypto Czar. There's a whole constellation of folks that are operating at and steering the frontier for America's Bitcoin policy. But there's a large iceberg under the water of kind of the machinery, the bureaucracy, the staffers, the technocrats that have to be educated on this, have to be convinced of it as a good idea. And so that's kind of the all of the above strategy, right? Like we want to both aim to the frontier, we want to drive and move the Overton window aggressively to where we think it's necessary or we think it's feasible. I think BitBonds is exactly that type of idea, that we want to pull from outside the Overton window to the center of the policy discourse. And that I think is in process at the moment. And as we do that, it's a matter of amplifying and educating as many folks inside DC. So we have, folks that are meeting on Capitol Hill pretty much every day. And we have, essentially the set of things that we want to make sure they understand, from the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve to BitBonds, and the sense that this isn't like a back burner issue that we're just trying to educate them on for, some indefinite future. It's like, this is a limited window of time where the U.S. has both the strategic and fiscal urgency and the actual ripe opportunity to take the most out of this idea, right? To actually capture most of the strategic advantage and most of the fiscal advantage. And if we leave it on the table, I think we'll kick ourselves in a few years for not having done the right thing when we could have. And so we want to do everything we can. That's BPI's purpose, is to get that message out. It's a very noisy environment inside DC. There's always something blowing up. There's always another reason to talk about something else other than Bitcoin policy. The advantage we have is we're laser focused, right, on this one thing. And we want to connect it to the larger issues that all these policymakers and staffers are having to deal with, and communicate to them why it actually helps solve those other problems. This isn't just, a sop to the Bitcoin industry or some sort of pat on the back to say thank you to some campaign contributors. No, this is a collective benefit for our strategic national interest over the long term, and especially for future generations that are going to be most exposed to these accelerating debt obligations that are going to have to be monetized or defaulted on. And so this is, a matter of our sort of raison d'etre. And so we're very active, the next few weeks and months, as the administration is trying to move from this initial flurry of executive orders. They obviously had a lot of sort of big moves they wanted to make on the crypto policy side. They have the two major, legislative priorities that have, I would say, consumed most of the energy on crypto policy today, which is stablecoin legislation and the market structure bill. And I would say, just speaking pragmatically, those have so much sunk cost and so much kind of embedded energy. Everyone just wants to get those done, right? Everyone's basically, we need to get those two bills signed by August. This sort of their line in the sand. And then there's a space essentially that can clear the decks for these other ideas, right? How we can get sort of the second wave of Bitcoin specific, from our perspective, but really strategic policies that are in the broader national interest. And so there's a bit of a tactical play about how to kind of seed this into the conversation in the next few months, knowing that there's going to be a broader aperture of political attention that's available to be kind of organized and focused on things like strategic Bitcoin reserve and BitBonds, which I think are highly complementary, right? They're essentially, in some sense, the same policy idea, right? Essentially, how does the government, on the one hand, establish and then acquire additional Bitcoin in a budget neutral fashion, do that in a way that accrues the maximum strategic long-term fiscal benefit and also shares the benefits of that strategy with everyone, right? In the American community. And so these are really conjoined ideas, and they build on each other naturally. And so I think it's all pushing in this very very similar and strategic direction. So a lot of our messaging and our analysis, our work with folks like Andrew is just putting fuel on that fire. I mean, American politics is American politics. It's nonlinear to say the least. But I think one lesson that I've drawn from my time working Bitcoin policy is just you can do things, right? That in fact the reality is malleable, right? And that if you articulate, if you explain, if you put the effort in, you can actually go pretty far, right? And so I think this is one of those ideas where it's worth pushing the effort, right? It's worth going hard in the paint, and you could find out that it actually it's easier than you thought, right? The dominoes can fall in a direction once a sufficient critical mass of folks understand the benefits of it. So yeah, we're really focused on that. I know, just a shameless plug for our policy summit in June in DC, which will be a much larger kind of our flagship event. Obviously, we're excited to have Andrew there if he can make it, and really kind of be put a flag in the ground in DC for Bitcoin policy, and really have a serious conversation that's in line with what we just talked about, which is moving from sort of rhetoric to action. Moving from broad scale policy commitments and executive orders to concrete policy actions, implementation, and get things done. Right now, let's channel this momentum. I think BitBonds is the top of that list in terms of things that are practical and executable. But we're also going to talk about broader issues that Andrew's also talking about, like intersection with Bitcoin and the energy system and AI and emerging technology, Bitcoin and human rights and financial inclusion, Bitcoin and national security and the geopolitical system, these larger changes. I think Bitcoin is not a niche side issue that just sort of stands on its own, that kind of gets its own special treatment. No, Bitcoin is this emerging phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon. And it's our thesis that it will become increasingly relevant to all of these different policy domains. And so all these policymakers across Department of State, Treasury, intelligence community, the White House, everyone needs to understand what this means for them and how they can make good on the commander's intent to make America a Bitcoin superpower and to promulgate this technology around the world that serves our interest and the interest of open society. So that's our mission. That's our mandate. We're going to be focused on that. We're really it's extremely exciting to have folks like Andrew that come from their own channels of expertise in structured finance that have this Bitcoin. That have been bitten by the Bitcoin bug as much as we have, and we can kind of join forces and really drive something like this forward. So I'll let Andrew kind of close this out, though. But I'm really excited for this.
I mean, it's hard for me to add to what you've said because you've said it so well. I'm excited about what BPI is working on across the board, and I think the time is right. I echo what you said about Bo Hines. I mean, what an energetic guy. It's hard to imagine a better person to be leading the Digital Assets Initiative. And I think that this administration has presented a very engaging attitude toward bold ideas and new ideas. And I think it's open. I think that they're open for this new mindset and open for good ideas. And we should take advantage of that as an American people. I mean, if someone has been listening to this podcast at this point, where we've been speaking for a little bit over an hour, it's clear that you're passionate about Bitcoin and BitBonds. And I guess in conclusion, what I would just request is that if you want to advance the strategic Bitcoin reserve and the BitBonds, the best way, the very, very best way that you can have a tangible and profound impact is to simply look up the Washington telephone number of your congressperson and your two senators and call and take 45 seconds for each one. So it'll be about what, 2.5 minutes total commitment or so, and say, I am calling, my name is so and so, I'm calling from such and such a place, and I want to let the senator know that I am urging the senator to co-sponsor the Bitcoin Act of 2025 and urging the senator to support and advance the BitBonds proposal. And I would appreciate if someone on the staff would give me a call back so that we could talk about this important issue and I could have the opportunity to share my perspective as a constituent. And if, I guarantee it, if 500 people that are listening to this podcast, let alone 5,000 people, pick up the phone and make that call, that will make Matt's life way, way, way easier. And it will really shift the needle on the successful implementation of this project. You cannot underestimate the relevance of really just engaging with constituent feedback and these elected officers. So I'm super excited to drive this forward. I think it has all merit, in terms of the win-win-win, the interest savings, putting the asset on the balance sheet of the government, providing a really attractive way for everyday Americans to invest and save in their future. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity to contribute to this conversation. And if anyone who's listening knows David Walker, let's get him involved too. Let's get the Comptroller General involved too, because I know that this is an issue that he has also been focused on for a long period of time. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's it that's the view from here.
Excellent.
Thank you, Grant. Andrew, we're very grateful for you and your work and for the excellent white paper. And we will link your presentation at Bitcoin for America about this topic, as well as the white paper in the show notes. So everyone should go check it out and learn more and call their representatives. So thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.